This session is about Russia. The topic or the theme is the victims of Putin. It seems a little bit scary. So, who are the victims of Putin and what is he doing in Russia and against the world? Today, we'd like to hear about this from the two people on the stage. So, let me introduce to you the special guests. First, Mrs. 율리아 Borisovna Nabalnaya. It's full name in Russian style. She is now the chairwoman of the advisory board Anti-Corruption Foundation. She is well known for Alexei Navalny's wife. Maybe you've heard a lot about her name in the media recently. Alexei Navalny, whom you remember, was one of the victims of Putin. Until recently, he was a symbol of the Russian democracy and anti-corruption movement. Navalny fought for a long time against Putin's dictatorship, exposing the corruption of Putin and his aides. He was a courageous leader. Unfortunately, he died in February this year in the memory of many people around the world. But Mrs. Navalnaya is taking over his intentions and fighting against the Putin's regime. She's going around the world exposing Putin's brutality and wrongdoings. In the left side is a Professor Chris Miller. He is famous for being the author of the best-selling books titled The Chip War, which deals with the global war on semiconductors. However, he is also a Russian expert who earned a doctorate in history from Yale University and published books on Russian history and Vladimir Putin. Now, let's take Mrs. Navalnaya to the podium to hear the speech. Please welcome her with a big round of applause. Thank you.
Hello, and thank you for being here. Dear participants of the World Knowledge Forum, I am grateful for the invitation and the opportunity to speak here today. Over the last 25 years, your forum has hosted politicians, scientists, business leaders, innovators, Nobel laureates, and writers. However, no politician from Russia has ever taken this stage until now. That's why I feel the importance and weight of this moment, and I want to explain why I'm speaking to you today. The first World Knowledge Forum was held in 2000. The same time, Vladimir Putin became president of the first time. During the time Putin has been in power, your country seen 6 different presidents. 2 of them were convicted of corruption and jailed after leaving office, while one was awarded the Nobel Prize. So what's better? One, internal Putin, or fierce competition where former leaders are held accountable for their mistakes? I think now the answer is clear. For instance, Korea's GDP per capita is now 50% higher than it was in 2011. Meanwhile, in Putin's Russia, it's 7% lower than in 2011 as well. For years, Putin promised prosperity to our citizens, but they have only grown poor. He has also taken away a freedom of election, independent courts, honest media, and basic human rights. Yet, during the same period, the number of billionaires in Russia has doubled, reaching 120. That's 3 times more than Korea, even though Korea's economy is just 20% smaller, has 3 times fewer people, 170 times less land, and only a fraction of the natural resources Russia possesses. How did this happen? Let me share a few more numbers. In Korea, the top 5 most successful entrepreneurs include the leaders of Samsung and Hyundai, companies whose electronics and cars are recognized and purchased worldwide. Also, at the list is the head of Celltrion, a pharmaceutical company that products cutting-edge cancer treatments. But if you look at the top of richest people in Russia, you'll see a very different story. All five made their fortunes in just two ways. First, by selling Russian natural resources, and second, by being close friends with President Putin. That's the path to the top of Russian Forbes list. It's no wonder you won't find Russian cars, electronics, or innovative medicines on the global market. This is the sad result of 25 years of Putin's rule. When power doesn't change, the economy and science degrade, and each Russian grows poor. Unlike Russia, the Republic of Korea chose the path of fighting corruption and building competitive, efficient economy. It wasn't an easy path. Democracy didn't just appear out of nowhere. Your country experienced military dictatorship, rampant corruption, and nepotism. But at the end, Korea chose a different path, and the results are clear for all to see. Sadly, Russia hasn't been able to do the same. Russia didn't choose its future. One man chose it for her. Vladimir Putin, who ended up in power almost by accident, quickly realized the opportunities that imperfect constitution gave him. He saw how easy it was to break and control immature institutions. He clung to the power and hasn't let go for 25 years. He started making his friends and family billionaires. Naturally, not everyone agreed with this, but those who opposed him were silenced. Political prisoners became to appear first in small numbers, then dozens, and eventually hundreds. They were the first victims of Putin's rule. Putin and his inner circle grew greedily, and the punishments for those who opposed the regime became harsher. You can see this clearly in the case of my husband, Alexei Navalny. In 2011, he received 15 days in jail for participating in protest. By 2017, he was regularly sentenced to 30 days and spent several months in jail each year. In 2021, he was sentenced to 3.5 years, and in 2023, that was increased to 19 years in prison. During this time, Russia lost freedom of press and electoral competition. The judiciary dismantled, as was local governance. Meanwhile, ordinary people grew poor as corruption stole their future. Putin's approval rating began to fall. So he turned to the classic dictatorship playbook, finding an external enemy, and eventually started the war. Now, not only are Russians suffering under his regime, but so are the people of Ukraine. Putin's missiles rain down on their cities, killing thousands of innocent civilians. It's important to emphasize that it is a very predictable thing. First, a dictator turns against his own people, oppressing and robbing them. Repressions eventually intensifies, and eventually the dictator begins terrorizing neighboring nations. I'm confident that you understand it much better than anyone after all. You have been watching this happening just 25 kilometers north of here for 70 years. My husband, Alexei Navalny, was Putin's main political opponent, a man who wasn't afraid to stand up to him and his regime. For that, Putin poisoned him in 2020. But Alexei survived. Then Putin imprisoned him and subjected him for years for brutal torture. Alexei was kept in solitary confinement with only a mug, toothbrush, and one book. His daily outdoor time was spent in another solitary cell, just without a roof. He was denied phone calls, visits, and even food. Yet he never wavered in his beliefs. Then, for that, Putin killed him. But the idea that Alexei stood for, that Russia can and must follow a different path, didn't die with him. By killing my husband, Putin didn't win. On the contrary, he proved once again that he is terrified of political competition. He fears democratic institutions. He fears freedom. He stays in power only through intelligence services, violence, weapons, and poisoning. His regime survives only on repression and propaganda, and that means it simply cannot last forever. I know that many in Korea care deeply about Russia's future. Our countries are relatively close and we share many connections. I also know that our struggle against Putin regime requires all support we can gather. We need allies from around the world. That's why I'm here, where no Russian politician has ever spoken before. But still, there are people who say it doesn't matter what happens in Russia, as long as the war in Ukraine ends. Who cares what happens to Russia next? They say that Russia should be walled off and left to become a giant North Korea. Let them deal with Putin on their own inside. But in this room, I don't need to explain why it's such a dangerous mistake. You know better than anyone else how much harm one small totalitarian dictatorship just north of your country can cause, and how much worse the world would be if another regime like that, only far larger and more dangerous, emerges. Countless innocent people would survive. The first victims and hostages of any dictator are his own people. They are deprived of freedom, along with their hope of a better future for their children. They are imprisoned and deprived of their rights. You understand it very well. We cannot and must not abandon Russia to Putin. Whatever resources are needed, this fight must continue until we achieve victory. I believe this, and so do millions of my husband's supporters, allies, all around the world and in Russia. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for that very powerful speech. I had not previously understood what a perfect location Seoul is for understanding what has gone wrong in Russia, and also looking to the north, how much further wrong things still could go. I'd be very interested to start our conversation by hearing your analysis of what went wrong in Russia. If you rewind the clock, there was a period not so long ago when there was real optimism about the ability of Russia to have competitive politics and democracy. So how was it in your analysis that Putin came to consolidate control in his own hands?
Well, I think I have already started to answer on this question during my speech. I think everything went wrong from the beginning. First of all, but Russians probably didn't realize well that this man who happened to be a president of such a huge country became a president accidentally. Because the previous president suggested him just, it sounds, I think, for people from the United States or even for people from South Korea, like, how could it be, but suggested him to be a president, and it couldn't be so. And of course, when the random person happened at the power, so situation could follow this path which it followed in Russia. Putin just felt this sense of power and became, as KGB officer, He took all his friends with him. He surrounded himself with all these friends, and he just realized what a huge opportunities give him this power of presidential power. It's just not about power influence on people. It's also, of course, power about to get tremendous money. And that's why my husband started his fight from anti-corruption cases, because it's very important for Russia. Many years, everything was built on corruption. Now, of course, it's built also on war, and the war is, of course, need to discuss. But before, of course, everything was built on corruption. As I said, Putin was surrounded by his friends and people who were and still who are keeping his money and still continue to live a lavish life, the life of the most richest people. I don't even think in Russia, but in the world. When you have such amount of money, but your political rankings are falling, of course you are looking for help you to hold this power for a long time. And I think it's one of the reasons why Putin started the war, because he wanted to have the same amount of money. He wanted to be surrounded with all these his friends, and also he wanted to keep all these people terrifying and to show that how powerful he is.
When I thought your comparison of the richest people in Russia and how they made their money versus South Korea was really quite striking in terms of the role of real businesses in South Korea versus friends of the president in Putin's system. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts. Sometimes when outsiders look in on Russia, they look at the polls, and of course we should be skeptical, I think, of polling data and say, well, a fair number of people seem to think that Putin's okay. And if you look at the Levada Center polls, for example, or other polls, can you help us understand what this data means? And is it true to think that at least some Russians are not opposed to Putin?
First of all, thank you very much for saying that it is good comparison between billionaires in Russia and here in South Korea. And on these figures, we can see very well how the rich people build their wealth. And it's very important for understanding, as I mentioned, that billionaires in Russia, they mostly build, not mostly, almost all of them, never had anything with business. So they are friends of Putin or who get some piece of natural resources of Russia. And coming back to the second part of your questions about polls. Of course, I don't think that we can count now on any polls which come from Russia, because I would take like an easy example. Can you imagine that in Russia or, for example, even in South Korea, somebody calls you by phone and asking, do you support Putin or not? Of course, your answer will be all the time, yes, I support. Because you understand that otherwise you can be not just called for a kind of conversation, but imprisoned. And it's very important to understand. Let's be honest. I wouldn't say that Putin doesn't have any support, but we are not able to count this support in figures in the right way. We cannot believe to the figures in the presidential elections because, again, I would be honored that propaganda in Russia is working well.
And now that both the independent media and also most independent political figures are in exile outside of Russia, how does that change the strategy that the opposition has?
It's very difficult to speak about strategy when you don't know what the president of such a big country will do the next moment. There are a lot of people in exile now because if you are against Putin and your opposition politician against Putin who's still in Russia, it mostly likely you will be in prison very soon. Sheet of paper without written anything, or for likes in social media, or for post no war, just no war. And that's why to be opposition politician now, it's sometimes it's very dangerous. I don't think that strategy has changed a lot. And I think that we all united in this, that we need everything what we can, that Putin's regime will fall as soon as possible, and which it will change a lot, probably not in the next day, but of course these changes will come much, much quicker than now, than we can see it now, and it will help with anything what's happening. It will help stop the war. Of course, first of all, it will help the economy. It will help people inside Russia to get their freedoms back, independent media, independent courts, everything.
But I think your point about we shouldn't overestimate the durability of Putin's rule is very important, because often a strong man system looks strong until the moment it falls apart. You see that in many countries, I think.
I don't think that we need to think that Putin is very strong. The situation is like that. He just keeps everyone in fear. That's what he can do well. People don't want to be in prison. Nobody wants. Nobody wants to be poisoned. Nobody wants to die. Nobody wants to be killed. Nobody wants to spend several years in prison and change their life dramatically. That's why he's still in power. But to say the truth, I don't think that person who just keeps in every part of the country and life, we can call him like strong one.
Thank you to the audience for listening. Very beneficial and useful time, I think. Thank you for the Mrs. Yulia Navalnaya and Chris Miller for good talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.